return of every single child in every year group back into school. We will always listen to the whole sector, whether it is trade unions or those who are running the schools or parents and children themselves.
Thank you. Thanks very much. We're now going to the chair of the Select Committee. We've got Robert Halfon. Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly welcome the catch-up announcement made by the government, which will make a huge difference to the left-behind children. Will my Rights Honourable friend just confirm that the money out of the billion can be used to set up summer schools or camps? And will the Department for Education work with Essex Council that is considering setting up summer camps across the county?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'd like to thank my Right Honourable friend for his input and his advice and his thoughts about how we can make sure that any intervention delivers the very best result. I'd happily confirm to my Right Honourable friend that that is what we'd be happy to do, work with Essex County Council, and as part of the Education Endowment Foundation's guidance is summer camps, and how this is targeted to deliver best educational advantage is one of those schemes that has been suggested.
Ib Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 has brought a significant impact upon the provision of children and adolescent...
Secretary of State.
Yes, sir. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 9 and 11 together. We've published guidance and resources for parents and schools on how to support children's mental well-being while they're not at school, and have given schools the flexibility to have face-to-face check-up with all pupils during the summer term. The return to school is the most vital factor in the well-being of pupils and educational progress. We've recently produced new training for teachers on how to teach about mental health issues as pupils go back.
James Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. COVID-19 has brought a significant impact upon the provision of children and adolescent mental health services across the UK. Could the Minister please confirm what is happening right now to reduce that backlog?
Secretary of State.
Yes. I know that my honourable friend has actually championed the issues of mental well-being of young people and all of his constituents often and regularly, and I'd be very happy to meet with my honourable friend to discuss how we can do more to help. We are working very closely with both Public Health England and NHS England about how we can help and how we can support them to reduce the waiting times with CAMS, and it's something I'll raise with the Secretary of State for help additionally to this.
10 withdrawn, so we go to Steve Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Calls to Childline are rising, and Young Minds has found that around 4 in 5 children with pre-existing mental health problems have had these problems worsened in this crisis, yet referrals to CAMS have been down by as much as 50% in some areas. How does the government plan to deal with the inevitable rise in demand for mental health services as identified by teachers in Portsmouth?
Secretary of State.
I think there's a great deal of cross-party consensus about this and how important it is. And it is something that often people approach schools as almost the first port of call, the easiest way to access sort of services. But it's how we integrate ever more closely health services with educational services. We put an additional £5 million worth of mental health support, but we do recognise that there's a lot of areas that we can sort of make sure interventions come earlier so it doesn't get to crisis point.
Secretary of State, we've got a substantive question, Margaret Greenwood.
In school are really important for helping 4-year-old children settle in and form positive relationships. The University College London study of the government's pilot of the reception baseline assessment last year found that the test caused anxiety, distress, and a sense of failure in many children, and we're talking about 4-year-olds here. So will the government do the right thing and abandon its plans to bring in the reception baseline assessment?
Secretary of State.
No, we won't.
We now go to Maria Miller.
Thank you, Speaker.
Minister.
Permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to answer questions 13 and 14 together. Since the 1st of June, we have taken positive steps in welcoming children back to school. Teachers and heads have done an excellent job in opening schools to more pupils, and our latest attendance figures show that approximately 92% of education institutions are open, with thousands more children back in classrooms where they can learn best, reunited with their teachers and friends. Sage papers are being published in tranches, including those of the Children's Task and Finish Working Group.
Ray Miller.
Can I take this opportunity to associate myself with the comments made earlier about the terror attack in Reading, a near neighbour to my Basingstoke constituency, and our thoughts are with the residents of that town. Mr. Speaker, there is no substitute for face-to-face learning, and thanks have to go to the school staff across my own constituency in Basingstoke and indeed across Hampshire, who are all working so hard to help ensure as many eligible children as possible can safely return to school. But parents want to know when all children can be back in school. What advice can my right honourable friend give to my constituents who are approaching me on that, but also approaching me to ask what organisations are being told who provide summer childcare support for working parents so that we can also support parents to get back to work?
Minister.
Well, we are working towards bringing all children and young people back to school in September. The government's ambition is that all organisations running holiday clubs and activities for children over the summer holiday will be able to open if, of course, the science allows. And the time anticipated for holiday clubs to open is no earlier than the 4th of July as part of step 3 of the government's recovery strategy.
With the happy Ian Mearns, we come with his supplementary.
Very grateful, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister's pointed out, as of 12 days ago, 92% of school settings were open, but only about 9% of children were actually attending. Many parents remain understandably reticent. We all want children to return to full-time education. Can I ask the Secretary of State what considerations have influenced the government thinking regarding the full reopening of schools, specifically in relation to the potential for child-to-child, child-to-adult transmission of the virus? Most school staff are not as concerned for themselves as they are for the potential implications that could be of particular seriousness for families of Black, Asian and minority ethnic children, children living in extended families, or children living in overcrowded conditions, or even those living in poverty. What considerations have been given to that in order to put parents' minds at rest?
Minister.
Well, the honourable gentleman raises an important point about disadvantaged children. Schools have been open to all vulnerable children since schools closed, and the children of critical workers, and we've encouraged more and more of those children to be in school where it is best for them. The scientific advice indicates that a phased return that limits the number of children in education settings and how much they mix with each other will help to reduce the risk of transmission. We're led by the science, and we are determined and with an ambition of all schools returning in September, but that will of course be subject to the science.
We've now got a substantive question from Henry Smith, Minister Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this deeply challenging time, it has been so important that people, especially children, have been able to stay in touch online. But of course, they should be able to do so safely. So we've worked with the National Crime Agency, UK Safer Internet, Internet Matters, NSPCC, and many other experts to provide detailed guidance and support to schools and colleges on keeping children safe online, as well as advice and high-quality resources for parents and carers.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree with me that although we must be cognizant of the risks on the internet to children and young people, that it is very important for their mental health and social well-being that they are encouraged to connect via various internet channels with family, friends, and others who are part of their support network?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Being online has had great benefits to children, giving them access to educational resources and entertainment, but also enabling them to stay in touch with family and friends, and that is vital to their well-being. Social media companies have a role in keeping children safe, and this government is committed to creating a statutory duty of care on companies to protect their users, especially children. But they shouldn't wait for us to legislate, they should act.
Shadow Minister Tulip Siddiq.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Charities like NSPCC and Barnardo's have highlighted how children are at increased risk of online harm during this pandemic. It has been over a year since the government's white paper on online harms, which set out the need for a duty of care regulator. Every day that this is delayed, more and more children are put at risk. So I ask the government now, at what point will the government stand up to the tech companies, put vulnerable children first, and bring forward this bill today?
Minister.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank the NSPCC and Barnardo's for the work that they're doing with the government to help keep children safe, both online but also in the home and outside the home. We are committed to introducing a duty of care on social media companies. We published the initial response from the consultation in February. A full response will be published later this year. We're working with the sector on a detailed code of conduct, but the first thing we must do to keep children safe is to get them back in school, and that is what I would like the Honourable Lady to be supporting us in doing.
Smith.
Number 17, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This month I appointed the UK's first international education champion. Together we are working to provide reassurance that our internationally renowned and world-leading universities will be open, flexible and welcoming, and communicating that we recently strengthened the UK's offer by announcing the new graduate route.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for that answer. International students are extremely important to the University of Buckingham, making up over 40% of all students there. Can I ask my honourable friend to work closely with the University of Buckingham and look at all possible measures to ensure international students can fully participate as soon as possible in the first-class education the university has to offer?
Yes.
I certainly will. I am leading a two-tier COVID response to attract international students. Firstly, working across government to remove and reduce logistical barriers faced by students, including visa issues. Secondly, communicating that the UK is open for business via advertising, open letters to international students, our embassies and international media.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if I may, I would just like to offer a couple of words on Fred Jarvis, who at 95 years old was also a friend of mine and a formidable education campaigner. And he taught me many, many things, and one of them being, don't ever patronise the elderly. They know more than any of the rest of us put together. So bless you, Fred. International students bring £20 billion to our economy and global soft power and influence, the loss of which will not just damage our universities. I do recognise the uphill battle the Minister faces, hindered by a slow and ineffective Home Office and the heartbreaking reality that the UK COVID-19 death toll is now the third highest in the world. So how will the Minister ensure our universities maintain capacity and sustain courses if international student numbers decline?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I already outlined, we are working to help mitigate the challenges that universities face, and that challenge is faced globally in the higher education sector. In addition to that, on May the 4th, we did announce a sustainability package on top of the additional support that the Treasury had already announced, which was £700 million to the sector, including the job retention scheme and access to coronavirus loans as well. The package that we announced on the May the 4th also included bringing forward £100 million of QR funding for research, as the Honourable Member will know, because international students do cross-subsidise research.
We now come to a substantive question to Minister Keegan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I will link questions 19, 20, 21 and 22. I'm sure my honourable friend will join me in thanking all staff in further and higher education for their work responding to this unprecedented challenge. They've done a fantastic job. In further education, we've introduced flexibilities and encouraged online teaching so that learners can complete their courses as planned. Colleges are open and we want to get all learners back into college as soon as is possible.
We go over to Cumbria with Dr. Neil Hudson. Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The coronavirus pandemic throws into sharp relief the importance of food production and security and the critical areas of health and social care. Newton Rigg College in Penrith, in my constituency, has over 1,000 learners and 130 staff and trains people in these vital areas such as agriculture, land-based studies and health and social care. The college has now been listed for possible closure in July 2021 by its host institution, Askham Bryan College, creating much uncertainty over its future. Will my honourable friend agree with me that colleges such as Newton Rig are vital for our rural communities? And will the Department for Education and other government departments work with me and local stakeholders to try and secure a viable and sustainable future for this prized asset of both Cumbria and indeed the wider UK?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Further education colleges are vital for supporting young people in rural communities to get the skills that they need. And I am aware that the governors at Askham Bryan College have made an in-principle decision to close the Newton Rig campus from July 2021. And indeed, my honourable friend and myself have now met twice with the FE Commissioner to discuss this at his request. So I know he's going to continue campaigning on this issue. My officials are working with the college and stakeholders to ensure learners and communities in and around Eden Valley continue to have access to high-quality further education.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The reintroduced graduate work visa could indeed help universities and colleges attract international students and recover from COVID-19. It's just an appalling reflection on Tory governments that we have been without such a visa for such a long time. But can ministers say what discussions they have had about extending the graduate visa offer to students who are already here on Tier 4 visas, so that both the education sector and wider economy can use their skills in our recovery?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question, and there's a lot of work going on to ensure that we do support the university sector through this crisis. On the 20th of April, the Home Office updated their visa guidance to provide greater certainty for international higher education students in the UK impacted by coronavirus, and on the 22nd of May, the Home Office announced that visas due to expire before the 31st of May would be extended into the 31st of July 2020 for those unable to return home. More work will be done in this area.
Heading north to Kirsten Oswald. Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Post-COVID, the stiff competition for international students will intensify. EU students make up a third of the international student body, but any deregulation of fees for EU students will sharply reduce their numbers. Can the Minister confirm there's no intention to cause such damage and the EU students in England will retain their home student fees status?
Minister.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. Of course, international students is a key concern for the sector at this moment, and as my Honourable friend, the Higher Education Minister, outlined before, there's a number of work going on in this area, and there's a two-tier system. Also, the Department of International Trade is working with the Department for Education to encourage students, particularly in Europe, to come over and continue their international student placements.
Staying in Renfrewshire with Gavin Newlands. Gavin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in paying tribute to Fiona, Alexander and Philip, the three young children who died in a tragic house fire in my constituency on Friday. Our thoughts and prayers are with their family and friends. Mr Speaker, many students who would normally work over the summer will now, through no fault of their own, be pushed into poverty. The Scottish Government has brought forward early access to £11 million to support students, but given the unique circumstances, they should not believe that flexibility and universal credit over summer would help many young people who are in an otherwise impossible position.
Minister. Minister.
Thank you. I thank the Honourable Gentleman. May I associate my comments with his the tragedy that he talks about. Of course, this is a very difficult time. There's a massive uncertainty in many of our sectors, and lots of those would have potentially provided short-term work opportunity to students. Obviously, the most important thing we need to do now is reopen our economy, get our economy working, and provide those opportunities for young people. In the meantime, there are a number of supports and discretionary grants that are available either through the FE sector or the HE sector to support students during this difficult time.
Remaining in Scotland with the SNP spokesperson, Carol Monaghan, with the first of two questions. Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I express my condolences and those of all my colleagues in the SNP benches to all those affected by the terrible attacks in Reading, and of course to the three children who died in the terrible house fire at the weekend. Mr Speaker, this week Scottish schools officially break up for the summer holiday, and I'm sure you'll join me in thanking the school staff who have worked so hard to ensure our children have continued to have educational input over the last few months. Mr Speaker, in response to the pandemic, on the 4th of May, the Government announced a temporary cap on student numbers at English universities to prevent institutions competing for students. As there was no such competition in Scotland, can the Minister explain why the same policy was then applied to Scotland a month later than England, with no consultation with the Scottish Government and after Scottish universities had sent out entrance offers?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government is taking steps to ensure universities in all four corners of the United Kingdom are able to continue delivering the world-class education system for which they are renowned. To do that, we announced a package of measures in May to support our universities, safeguard the interests of students. And this means that every student who wants to go to university, who gets the grades, can achieve their ambition. And this will include new measures to temporarily control student numbers and combine that with an enhanced clearing system. This is the right thing to do to ensure a fair and orderly admission system.
Second question, Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But it is notable that Scottish universities found out a month later than their counterparts in England. So much for consultation. Mr. Speaker, as we move towards kick-starting the economy post-COVID, higher education is a potential growth industry. However, former Universities Minister Jo Johnson says that there must firstly be a recognition of the lasting reputational damage that has been done to the sector, calling on the government to end the hostile bureaucracy facing overseas students. So in order to send a clear signal that the UK is open, what discussions has the Minister had with the Home Office on increasing the graduate work visa from 2 to 4 years to ensure the UK has a globally attractive offer?
I thank the Honourable Member for her question. Clearly the UK does have a globally attractive offer due to just sheerly the number of people who want to come to study in the UK. There are many benefits to doing that. Of course, we are very proud of this sector. We'll continue to work with this sector during this difficult time, and we'll continue to work with the Department for International Trade and the Home Office to make sure that the path for international students to come and study here is as clear as possible.
David Johnson.
Number 25, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
My honourable friend is quite right to raise the important role of destination data, and it is great to read that King Alfred's School in his constituency has seen 91% of 2017 leavers go on to further education, employment or an apprenticeship, which is above the average in England.
Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for that statement. Does he agree with me that destinations data is particularly important in the light of COVID, and that we need both our schools focused on helping young people to the destinations they were on track for before lockdown, and our colleges, universities and employers taking due account of the loss of learning in making their decisions?
We must never lose sight of the important role in terms of actually what the youngsters actually go on and end up doing. Yes, we want them to leave school, college and university as well-rounded and with all the tools to succeed in life, but they have to be tools that lead them into jobs and employment so they can continue to succeed. And this is why the destination data is so important and why it's quite right that Ofsted put such a high importance to it.
We've got a substantive question to Minister Donlan from Mohammed Jassin. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recognise that university students and graduates are facing a number of challenges at this time. In May, we announced a package of stabilisation measures which ensures we continue to look after the best interests of students, as well as supporting our world-class higher education system. We are also working closely with the sector to support graduates.
Mohammed Jassin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In addition to maintaining current commitments to widening participation and extending bursaries for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, will the Minister commit to the necessary extra funding to ensure universities like the University of Bedfordshire can play a key role in retraining and reskilling young and mature students to meet the serious employment challenges ahead?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member is quite right to say that access and participation is a key priority for this government, and the OFS launched access and participations for every institution. Additionally, higher education does play a key role in terms of filling the skills needs of the economy, but also does FE. And what our priority is to ensure that the quality is there and also that students make informed choices that are in the best interest for their career destinations.
Caroline Knowles.
Question 28.
Social distancing is challenging with young children, so we've worked with stakeholders on a detailed planning guide to keep early years settings safe. This includes advice on keeping people, including children, in small, consistent groups and implementing hygiene measures. And thanks to the sector's work in reassuring families, 234,000 children were in childcare on the 11th of June.
Caroline Noakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nursery providers in my constituency are worried that social distancing will see a reduction in capacity, which for them means a reduction in income. This is a sector that is already at crisis point, and I would just like my honourable friend to reassure me that she's working closely with the sector to make sure that there will be places available so that parents, particularly mothers, will be able to go back to work.
Minister.
We all recognise how important early years settings are, both for the children and for their parents and carers. Early years settings have been able to open their doors to all children from the 1st of June. I spoke to sector representative organisations and childcare providers in the first week of wider opening to understand the detailed challenges that they face. We know this is a difficult time for many businesses, and we will continue to ensure early years providers get the best possible help from all the government's support schemes.
Number 29, sir.
Again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our recruitment and retention strategy sets out our plans to attract high-quality recruits to the profession. The Get Into Teaching marketing campaign provides information to trainees, including the availability of tax-free bursaries and scholarships worth up to £28,000 in certain subjects. And we've also set out plans to increase the minimum starting salary for teachers to £30,000 by September 2022.
Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for that answer. Sadly, many people are losing their jobs or threatened with redundancy. And we know that there's a massive shortage of teachers in physics and maths in particular. So will my right honourable friend enable schools to second people from industry to fill those vacancies so that people with talent can fill the vacuum?
Well, the organisation Now Teach, set up by Lucy Calloway, which we support, has seen a huge surge in interest from people such as the people that my honourable friend suggested. It helps career changers to come into teaching, and we've also seen a 12% increase in applications to teacher training in the last quarter to the end of May.
Neil O'Brien. Number 30, please, Mr. Speaker. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are committed to enabling students to make the most informed decisions possible, tackling low-quality courses and ensuring that students and the taxpayers see a return on their investment. We want a high-quality, sustainable model that meets our skills needs and maintains our world-leading reputation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The IFS found that for 30% of students, the economic returns on their degree for taxpayers and students were negative. Surely, with such clear economic evidence that so many young people will be better off going down a different route, it's time to rebalance from just higher education to a stronger technical education system.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is important that students make as informed choices as possible from a range of high-quality courses, and university is not always the only, or in fact the best route for certain careers. Some students may be better placed doing higher technical qualifications or apprenticeships, which is why the Secretary of State is spearheading a revolution in further education in this country, including the introduction of T-levels.
Simon Baines.
Question 31, please.
Minister.
The government has provided a £100 million package of advice and support to enable remote teaching to take place, including delivering laptops and tablets to vulnerable and disadvantaged children, and working with the new Oak National Academy, the BBC and others to ensure strong national availability of remote educational resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Minister agree that schools have not only, as he has just stated, provided imaginative remote online learning during the crisis, but that they have also played a vital role in supporting the front line through education hubs and related projects such as the production of PPE equipment by students at Ysgol Dinas in my constituency of Clwyd South?
Minister. Well, we're very grateful to the hard work and dedication of our teachers during this time, and we have highlighted the innovative work of schools in a series of case studies which we published recently. I congratulate those at Ysgol Dinas on producing over 800 visors, which is a prime example of that very innovation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I pay tribute to the huge effort schools, health and staff across Hertford and Stortford have made in supporting the children of key workers and are now making to get more pupils back to school? And can I ask my right honourable friend if he agrees that schools have an opportunity to continue with some of the innovations, such as remote learning, which have been made at this time?
Minister. Well, remote teaching has been a significant challenge for teachers across the sector, and I'm grateful to all those who've worked so hard to ensure that their pupils' education continues despite the difficulties of lockdown. Some innovations will no doubt continue to be beneficial, and we're working with organisations like the Education Endowment Foundation to take an evidence-based approach to establish how schools can best use remote practices in the future.
We now come to 34 with a substantive question. Minister Ford. Sorry, 33.
Thank you. Around 18% of children with an education, health and care plan or a social worker attended an education setting on the 11th of June. The department does not collect separate attendance data for those eligible for free school meals.
Heading to Yorkshire with John Trickett. John Trickett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. But isn't she ashamed that after 10 years of a Tory government, that there are almost exactly 100,000 children at risk in West Yorkshire alone, living in families with multiple vulnerabilities? A large number of those are still not at school and therefore are at risk. What is she going to do about it?
Minister.
I'm enormously proud that after 10 years of a Conservative-led government, the attainment gap between those from disadvantaged backgrounds and those from more advantaged backgrounds has narrowed at every stage of children's education. We have kept schools open for vulnerable children, and those children most at risk have been seen or contacted by their social workers, and I'd like to thank social workers and schools across the country for doing that. We need to get children back to school, and the opposition should support us.
Secretary of State, number 1, Topicals, Kate Osmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know that every child and young person in this country has experienced unprecedented disruption to their education as a result of coronavirus. This government is committed to doing everything we can to ensure that they have the support that they need to make up for this lost time in education. That is why on Friday I announced a £1 billion catch-up plan that will lift outcomes for all pupils, but with targeted support for those from the most disadvantaged backgrounds who are most at risk.
We're going to Kate Osmore. Kate Osmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me start by thanking the government for the recent U-turn on free school meals over the summer months. But I would like to ask the Minister what cross-departmental communications he has undertaken with the Housing, Communities and Local Government Minister to clarify if this will be extended to those children whose parents are newly subjected to no recourse to public funds restriction.
Secretary of State.
This is a matter I will take up with the Secretary of State for MHLG, and I'll write to the Honourable Lady in response.
Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Whilst last Friday's announcement was welcome, please can the Secretary of State outline how this coming autumn he will support colleges like East Coast College in Lowestoft as they faced a major challenge with supporting those 16 to 19-year-old students whose courses have been badly disrupted? And can you also review the method of funding with regard to capping and lagging payments, which present specific problems, cash flow difficulties that colleges will have difficulty in overcoming at this time?
Minister Keane.
I thank my honourable friend for his question. It is our ambition that East Coast College and all college students will have the opportunity to make up for lost education. Remote learning has been working really well, but we will provide more details soon on how 16 to 19 providers can further support students. Funding allocations for 2020-2021 have been guaranteed and payments will be made in line with the national profile.
Shadow Minister Perkins.
I don't know why that answer couldn't have been given to my friend from Ilford North, who asked a very similar question and got no sort of answer. But the government must realise that leaving level 4 students people who've missed out on level 4 in maths and English out of the catch-up funding means that they are being abandoned at the very time that the government needs them most. How can the government justify leaving them out of that announcement when a plan for schools was in place last week?
Minister.
I think it's clear the initial focus has been on the school catch-up. There's been a great response from the further education sector. They were quick to move online. They provided a wide range of engaging and innovative classes. But we do recognise the need for catch-up, particularly those starting college from school. And we're working to see what more support we can give to make up for the disruption due to COVID-19.
Joe Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Wolverhampton, we have several outstanding SEND schools. Including Penhall and Tetnall Wood. What is my right honourable friend doing to help vulnerable children return to education safely in these schools?
Secretary of State.
Well, I know my honourable friend is a great champion of these schools, and I'd like to mention Whittick Hall, which is, of course, a school on the constituency border of my constituencies. What we recognise, it's really important to make sure that we get the guidance right, and we've been working very closely with the sector to ensure that the specialist needs of many of these children, who sometimes have particularly complex health conditions, are met, and that they have the ability to return back to school at the earliest opportunity, if it's in line with their health needs as well. And I look forward to joining my honourable friend to hopefully have the opportunity to visit one of these schools in the not too distant future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister recently defended a relaxation of visits to children in care throughout this pandemic, claiming that they did not remove any fundamental protections for vulnerable children. She added that she was monitoring their use, yet she can't tell me how many children have gone missing from care in the same time period. Why is that?
Minister forward.
Due to COVID-19, we have made some temporary flexibilities for local authorities. These are temporary, these are not permanent, and they're only to be used when normal procedures cannot be followed. The number of missing children at this time, I am told, has decreased.
Neil O'Brien.
Mr. Speaker, across Harbour Road in Wigston, teachers have done a wonderful job of looking after children during lockdown. What steps is my right honourable friend taking to get our schools fully reopened, but do it in a way that is safe for both pupils and teachers?
Minister Gibb.
Well, the government wants all schools to be fully reopened in September. We have produced guidance on protective measures that schools would take, and all staff, children and families will have access to testing if they display symptoms. We're working with local authorities and regional schools commissioners to address any particular local issues, but it is in the interest of all children to be in school with their friends and with their teachers.
Kat Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question was to the Universities Minister, but in her absence I'd like to ask the Secretary of State perhaps whether or not she shares my concerns about the recent spate of redundancies in the sector. And also I've been contacted by many constituents over the past week who are being asked by their employer, Lancaster University, to donate part of their salary back to their employer. So I'd like to ask whether or not the Department's Structural Transformation Fund will guarantee that no university will fail, and if she would like to comment on the appropriateness of higher education institutions asking employees to donate salaries back to the employer.
Minister Donlan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure the honourable member I am anything but absent. As already announced, before we did launch a package on May the 4th, which included reprofiling 2.6 billion of tuition fee funding. We brought forward 100 million of QR funding. We stabilised the admission system with student number controls, and we offered more support for students. This was all on top of access to the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme and the Business Loan Support Scheme to the value of 700 million. I am more than happy to speak to the university in question directly.
Damien Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Schools across England, including my Southport constituency, will benefit from the £1 billion catch-up fund. Would my right honourable friend also commit to, in that time to ensuring that school standards still continue to improve? And also, would he confirm that he will pay another visit to my constituency to see this in action?
I'd be absolutely delighted to join my honourable friend and visit schools in his constituency in the very near future. It's really important that we understand the vital role that Ofsted plays in making sure that we have strong accountability in schools. And when we're looking at making this significant investment of £1 billion in terms of supporting youngsters to catch up and supporting schools, one of the areas and aspects I'll be asking Ofsted to look at is how this has been implemented and how children have been supported in their catch-up plans.
Returning to Scotland with Dr. Lisa Cameron. Dr. Lisa Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week is National School Sport Week, run by the Youth Sports Trust. This year it is being reinvented at home. Inclusive sport has an important role in young people's mental health, their well-being, confidence and mental health. So will the Secretary of State be engaging in an online sports challenge this week to support National School Sport Week and encourage families to continue with the benefit of school sports?
Secretary of State.
I feel the answer can only be yes.
Timpson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And on the same theme, recent data suggests from Sport England that 1 in 3 children have been less physically active during lockdown, with 1 in 10 doing no physical exercise at all. So can my honourable friend take the opportunity today, which is during National Schools Week, to confirm that the instrumental PE and sport premium for primary schools, worth £320 million a year, that was introduced by the coalition government in 2013, will have its funding guaranteed for the next academic year of 2020-21?
Minister Gibb.
Well, the government wants to ensure that all children get an active start in life and engage in daily physical activity, which is why we launched the School Sport and Activity Action Plan last year. We will confirm arrangements for the primary PE and sports premium in the 2020-21 academic year as soon as possible.
We're to Vicky Foxcroft. Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a condition of its funding support for Transport for London, government is requiring TfL to withdraw free school travel for the under-18s. Now, this will make it even harder to get children and young people back into education, 60% of whom in London are from black and ethnic minority communities. Why is this government so intent on making life harder for my constituents?
Minister Gibb.
Well, the key is to get more children to be walking and cycling to school and using other forms of transport other than public transport. But we are working across government with the Department for Transport and the Minister for Housing and Local Government to address the transport issues that are needed in order to get children back to school in September.
Scott Benton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week's announcement of an extra £1 billion will make a real difference in terms of providing additional support to those children who have fallen behind whilst out of school. It is imperative that this funding is targeted so that it can have the maximum possible impact. And so may I ask my right honourable friend whether this additional money will be dispersed in a way in which communities with acute educational challenges, such as Blackpool, can benefit the most?
Minister Gibb.
Well, the government will do whatever it can to ensure that no child falls behind as a result of the COVID COVID-19 crisis, and that's why we have announced a £1 billion package of support that includes a catch-up premium for schools and a tutoring programme for those in need, including, of course, children in Blackpool.
John Speller. Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the COVID pandemic has revealed how shockingly dependent this country has become on other countries to train our medical workforce and the previous neglect of training. So will the Minister now prioritise a rapid and substantial increase in training places in our universities and colleges and capital funding for such as virtual reality training for doctors, nurses and other medical personnel, not only to staff our NHS, but also to provide career opportunities for our youngsters?
Secretary of State.
Well, I think the Right Honourable Gentleman makes a very important and very thoughtful point in his question. It's really important that we look at different ways that we can expand the capacity to train doctors and nurses and all those who are working in the caring professions. And I'll look forward to working very closely with my Right Honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, in order to be able to deliver on that.
Duncan Baker.
It's thanks to your careful management of this crisis, Secretary of State, that more children are able to return to school. But as that happens, the 15 pupils per bubble is causing some problems in schools that don't have the resources to split classes. What steps can you take to ensure this is addressed?
Secretary of State.
My honourable friend is absolutely right that there are some natural restrictions as to how far schools can go in terms of welcoming children back. Last week we gave schools added flexibilities in order to be able to welcome more children back into the classroom, and we'll look as guidance changes within government as to how we do everything that needs to be put in place that every child is back in the classroom in September.
LeBron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is Windrush Day. I hope the Secretary of State will join me in paying tribute to all those from BAME backgrounds who teach in our schools and our staff in our schools. But I wonder, had he read the letter that I sent him, signed from members from across this House, asking for a review of the curriculum in the light of the Black Lives Matter movement, so that it better represents all communities across the whole of our country?
Yes, I have seen the Honourable Member's letter, and on this anniversary of Windrush, as much as any day, we need to understand the strong feelings on this issue. People do suffer racial prejudice, and we need to eliminate discrimination and bigotry wherever it occurs in our society. So far as the curriculum is concerned, we give schools the autonomy to decide what and how history is taught, provided it covers a wide range of periods of British and world history, but that very autonomy means that schools can and do teach about Black and Asian cultures and history. And the citizenship curriculum and the new relationship curriculum teaches the importance of the respect for other cultures and respect for difference.
Mark Fletcher, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last and hopefully not least, I'd like to place on record my thanks to the governors, teachers and head teachers across the Bolsover constituency who've managed to get our schools up and going again. But one of the common complaints that I have heard from them is that guidance has often been issued sort of quite late or at inconvenient times. Can the Secretary of State make sure that that their complaint is heard and that in future we will issue guidance with plenty of time?
Secretary of State.
By the nature of the crisis, sadly, the guidance that we always want to get out at the greatest of speed has sometimes always faced quite considerable time pressures. I can assure my honourable friend we very much take his words to heart, and as we issue guidance for schools about the full return of all pupils in September, we'll be ensuring that this goes out in plenty of time before schools rise for the summer.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order. Order! Before I call the Home Secretary to make a statement on the very sad events in Reading on Saturday, I have a short statement to make. As matters stand, no criminal charges have been made, and so the case is not yet subject to sub judice resolution. However, it is reasonable to expect charges soon, and I urge all honourable members to exercise care not prejudice any future trial by what they say. Honourable members will also wish to know that we will observe a minute's silence tomorrow at 11 a.m. to remember the victims of this event. I now call Secretary of State Priti Patel to make a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll make a statement on the senseless terror attack which took place in Reading on Saturday evening. This appalling attack is now subject to an ongoing police investigation. As such, there are limits as to what I can say, but I want to share as much detail as I can with the House this afternoon on behalf of the police, following my conversations with them over the weekend and my visit to Reading this morning. At around 7 p.m. on Saturday evening, a 25-year-old male entered Forbury Gardens in the centre of Reading and began to viciously attack several groups of people. The outstanding police officers from Thames Valley Police responded with great courage and great speed. The armed suspect was tackled to the ground by an unarmed officer and was immediately arrested at the scene. The suspect remains in custody. After initial investigations, Counter-terrorism policing declared the attack a terrorist incident and are now leading the investigation. Police have confirmed that the threat is contained, but that sadly 3 innocent members of the public were killed, murdered by a sudden and savage knife attacker as they enjoyed a summer evening with friends. Another 3 victims were injured and received hospital treatment. My thoughts and prayers are with the family and friends of everyone who was hurt or killed as a result of this sickening attack. The Victim of Terrorism Unit at the Home Office and family liaison officers are supporting them. And I know honourable members from across the House will join me in sending our heartfelt condolences. Mr. Speaker, it's truly humbling to visit Thames Valley Police this morning. I had the privilege of meeting the officers who first responded to the incident and who were responsible for apprehending the suspect, as well as trying to prevent the loss of further life. These officers, a few of whom were student officers, ran towards danger to help those in need without a second thought. A young unarmed police officer took down the suspect without hesitation, while another performed emergency first aid to those who were injured. These officers are heroes. They showed courage, bravery, and selflessness way beyond their years. They are the very best of us. I would also like to pay tribute to the response of every emergency service that attended the scene, as well as members of the public who stepped in to prevent a further loss of life. Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom has the best security services and police in the world. Since 2017, they have foiled 25 terrorist plots, including 8 driven by right-wing ideologies. They serve the country with professionalism and courage, embodying what the British public rightly expect from those in the front line of the battle against violent extremists and terrorists. The UK's counter-terrorism strategy remains one of the most comprehensive approaches to countering terrorism in the world. But over recent decades, we have all too often seen the results of poisonous extremist ideology. The terrorist threat that we face is complex, diverse, and rapidly changing. It is clear that the threat posed by lone actors is growing. These terrorists are united by the same vile hate that rejects the values that our country holds dear: decency, tolerance, and respect. And we are united in our mission to tackle terrorism in all its forms. Since day one, this government has backed our police and security services, who work around the clock to take down terrorists and violent extremists. On any given day, they make a series of calculated judgments and decisions on how best to protect our citizens and country, based upon the intelligence that they gather. In light of the many complexities across the security, intelligence, and policing communities, in January this year, I announced increased resources for counter-terrorism policing, resulting in a £90 million increase this year alone. This has taken counter-terrorism policing funding to over £900 million, the highest ever. And this is because we live in a complex world, against a backdrop of evolving threats and dynamic threats. Threats that, when they do materialise, are worse than shocking, as they result, as we have seen again this weekend, the tragic loss of life. Bolstering our security and policing network and frontline capability is part of our ambitious programme to strengthen the joint working between the police and security services, to leave terrorists with no place to hide. It is also why we are committed to developing a new protect duty, so that businesses and owners of public places must take into account the threat of terrorism, and why, following the shocking attacks of Fishmongers Hall and Streatham, we took strong and decisive action. Action which included the introduction of the Terrorist Offenders Restriction of Early Release Act, the emergency legislation which retrospectively ended the automatic early release for terrorist offenders, serving standard determined sentences, forcing them to spend a minimum 2/3 of their time behind bars before being considered for release by a parole board. And through our counter-terrorism and sentencing bill, which enters committee stage in this House this week, we are introducing much tougher penalties for terrorists to keep the public safe. This is the biggest overhaul of terrorist sentencing and monitoring in decades, strengthening every stage of the process, from introducing a 14-year minimum jail term for the most dangerous offenders to stricter monitoring measures. And Jonathan Hall QC is looking at how different agencies, including the police, probation services and security services, investigate, monitor and manage terrorist offenders. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I totally understand the desire for details and information to enter the public domain, particularly at this particular time, as to what happened and why. But as you, Mr. Speaker, has pointed out, I would ask everyone, including the media, to be cautious at this stage about reporting on individuals who have not been charged. We must not do anything that could risk the victims or their loved ones from achieving justice. Mr. Speaker, the first duty of any government is to protect the people it serves. And so we continue to pursue every option available to tackle the terrorist threat and to take dangerous people off our streets. As the Prime Minister reiterated yesterday, the police and security services will continue in their investigations to better understand the circumstances of this tragic incident. And if further action is needed, we will not hesitate. Our world-class CT police and security services have my unequivocal backing as they hunt down hate-fueled terrorists and extremists. So my message today is clear, simple and strong. Swift justice will be done, victims will be supported, and if further action is needed to stop terrorists in their tracks, this government will not hesitate to act. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary Nick Thomason.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement and her briefing call over the weekend. Like the whole House, I was shocked and appalled by the scenes we saw in Reading on Saturday evening. Whilst doing no more than visit a beautiful park, 3 innocent people were stabbed to death and another 3 seriously injured. Today we remember those who have died, and our thoughts and condolences are with their families and friends at this moment of terrible loss. We send best wishes to those who are injured, wish them a swift recovery, and thank our magnificent NHS staff for the care they are providing. The incident was one of senseless violence, and as always we are indebted to our outstanding police officers and other emergency service personnel for their swift response and work at the scene, helping others by putting themselves in danger. They represent the very best of us. We thank them and the public at the scene who assisted and recognise their courage and their bravery in this most awful of situations. We now know that this has been declared a terrorist incident, and I know that the whole House will support the police as they carry out the highly detailed, careful investigation that is necessary with an incident like this. I hope the Home Secretary can confirm that all necessary resources will be made available to Thames Valley Police and to counter-terrorism policing. I'm sure the Home Secretary will also agree with me that whilst there are quite understandably many questions about this specific case, the best thing to do is to give the police the space they need to conduct the investigation and to establish the facts, and not to indulge in unhelpful speculation. I'd also like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Reading East, for his calm, measured leadership in such a difficult moment. It is heartbreaking that we are having this conversation again, so soon after the terrible attacks at Fishmongers Hall in November that tragically took the lives of Jack Merritt and Saskia Jones, and the attack in Streatham in February. This is a live investigation, as you have said, Mr. Speaker, so we have to ensure there is due process and that the police can do their job. But the country will want answers about these incidents, which have occurred in such quick succession. So whilst the priority today must be to ensure that there are no further related threats and that the victims and families are cared for, it is vital that questions are addressed. I hope the Home Secretary will confirm that she will further update the House on this awful incident and the lessons that need to be learned, but there are some matters I would like her to deal with today. The Home Secretary mentioned the emergency piece of legislation in February, and there is another bill on counter-terrorism going through the House at present with cross-party cooperation, and I hope any further legislation can be on a cross-party basis as well. But does the Home Secretary also agree that legislation alone is not enough? We need a comprehensive look at de-radicalisation in our prisons, how people who pose a threat are risk assessed, and how different agencies can work together to safeguard against tragedies in the future. Community police are the eyes and ears of our society. The intelligence gathering they do is vital. And can the Home Secretary assure me that the government will never again cut the numbers of community police and will instead build the capacity that's required for law enforcement? Can she also assure me that the Serious Violence Task Force, which has not met since 26th of June last year, will meet soon and on a regular basis? She rightly praised, Mr. Speaker, the Intelligence and Security Services, but we know that the Intelligence and Security Committee has not met for over 6 months. Can the Home Secretary confirm when the committee will have all its members in place and exactly when it will meet next? Finally, Mr. Speaker, I know there will be many issues in the weeks ahead, but let the message go out from this House today that we stand alongside the wider community in Reading at this dark moment and say that those who have lost their lives will never be forgotten.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his comments and his thoughtful remarks in terms of Reading as a community. And following my meeting this morning, I did meet with the member for Reading East and made exactly the same point about working unitedly at a community level, multi-faith with all organisations, because that's really important, not just now, but in terms of going forward, to ensure that people are remembered in the right and appropriate way, but also that we support the community at this difficult time, which is something that we all do. The Right Honourable Gentleman has asked some important questions. He is absolutely right. Legislation is never the only answer or the only solution, not just on issues of this nature, but wider safeguarding, community measures, and the responses that are put in place, which brings me on to community responders, police officers, backing our police, but also resourcing those that keep our communities, people and our country safe. It is right. And in fact, with Thames Valley Police this morning, when I met with the Chief Constable, John Campbell, again, that is a conversation that I had. I was in touch with him over the weekend, and I've had that assurance that they are well supported in terms of the resources that they need. They're dealing with a live investigation. Obviously, this investigation is now a CT investigation, but even so, they have given me that assurance. But there are a number of other things as well, points to make, just on this front too. When it comes to violence of all nature, serious violence, and the Right Honourable Gentleman mentioned Serious Violence Board, we do now, of course, have the National Policing Board, which has effectively taken over that remit. And the National Policing Board has already met several times, even through in recent weeks as well, to discuss not just policing, but crime and the overall crime strategy that the government is taking from a holistic perspective. That also covers the Ministry of Justice side, the end-to-end aspect of the criminal justice system, how offenders are treated. And the Right Honourable Gentleman has also spoken about work that is required around de-radicalisation in prisons and the work that needs to take place, building upon prevent, building upon safeguards that exist already. But these are evolving issues in in terms of the type of skills that are needed, the resources obviously that are needed, but the type of techniques that need to be invested in terms of de-radicalisation and prevent work. That is something that is continuous. There is never one solution at all in terms of how to de-radicalise individuals. There are a range of tools, a range of techniques and a range of programmes in place. It is right that we continue to review that and work with that. And of course there is a great deal of work, as the honourable gentleman will know, that's taking place around the review of Prevent right now. His final comment and point related to the Security Committee, that of course is taking place in terms of the appointment to the committee, and an announcement will be made in due course as to when that will be coming forward.
I invite the House to join with me in sending our deepest sympathy to the friends and family of James Furlong and to the staff and pupils of the Holt School Woking where he taught. He was, by all accounts, an inspirational teacher who always went the extra distance for his pupils and was a very kind man, and he will be sorely missed. And the community is obviously very shaken today by this news. But will the Home Secretary intensify the efforts of the intelligence services, the police, the border forces and the others? Because we've had too many of these mass murders in recent years, and we want some reassurance that we can get on top of this and save the lives of others for the future.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right, and I too pay tribute to the shocking events that have happened, and pay my respect as well to Mr Furlong for what has happened. Absolutely appalling events and attacks, and all our sympathies and thoughts are with his family and his friends. My right honourable friend is absolutely right in terms of the intensification of the work that is taking place, and of course this is cross-cutting across government, covering a range of measures: police, intelligence, security. The right honourable gentleman also mentioned our borders and the work that we are doing in terms of reviewing our borders, dealing with criminality checks. That is all ongoing work, and it will of course be intensified.
Heading to Scotland with the SNP spokesperson, Kenny McCaskill. Kenny McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I start by, on behalf of my party, expressing our sorrow at the lives that have tragically been lost, and extending our deepest sympathies to those, their families and friends, and to those who are currently ill and recovering in hospital. It's never easy to lose a loved one, but especially not in these circumstances or at these times. And I echo the Secretary of State's comments regarding our gratitude to those who served and who showed great courage and who will continue to prosecute and investigate. Can I first of all call for a calm response, which I think, to be fair, the Secretary of State has made clear. We have sadly had previous terrorist atrocities. It's a product of our time. We don't expect and shouldn't have to live with it, but we do have to recognise that they do occur. And what we have to recognise is we do have to show calm judgment, not make a rush to an analysis, or indeed make a decision without knowing the full facts. And that has obviously been commented upon yourself regarding it being sub judice. There may very well be mental health or other aspects that we don't know. We wait the outcome of an investigation. But what we can be clear about, and what I would seek to be, again, have the Secretary of State's reassurance, that we make it quite clear that terrorist acts are not perpetrated by communities, they are carried out by individuals. They do not represent any faith, constituency, or indeed cause other than their own misguided and indeed malevolent and wicked views. And we need to take that into account. And we also need to remember that although we have suffered not just this recent tragedy, but all too recent ones, including members very close to this House, what some people basically view as the epicentre of the areas that perpetrate terrorism actually suffer far more from it than we do in our entire history, and we need to take that into account. So on that issue, I would like to ask and seek the reassurance from the Secretary of State that steps will be taken to ensure that reassurance and protection is given to minority communities, because I do know from my own experience in Scotland that there can be those who will rush to judgment and seek to apportion blame, and will, through misguided views or indeed their prejudice and dogma, seek to carry out attacks against minority groups, and therefore would ask that steps, which I no doubt are probably ongoing, are in fact carried out, but equally seek some reassurance that, as well as contest, we will also seek to prevent that at the end of the day, we do need to not only protect our minority communities, we need to deal with issues that are bubbling under the surface there. So as well as contesting terrorism and confronting it quite rightly, we need to protect communities and address injustice wherever it is.
The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right in terms of ensuring that communities not vilified at this particular time, and minority groups in particular and communities. This is actually a moment where we should all be coming together to be supportive across all communities, and in particular, as I discussed earlier on this morning with the Honourable Member for Reading East as well, communities locally, multi-faith groups. So there is so much more work that obviously needs to take place, but there is great work taking place, and we should not lose sight of that right now.
We come to the Member of Parliament, Matt Rodder, whose constituents are affected.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. If you allow me to take a moment, because it's been a very difficult few days. I would also like to thank the Home Secretary for meeting me today, and I very much thought the tone of our discussion was very helpful and positive, and I look forward to working with her and appreciate her offer of support for Reading. Mr Speaker, like many other local people, I was shocked and deeply upset by the dreadful attack in Forbury Gardens. I want to offer my deepest condolences to the families of the 3 people who died. My thoughts are with them. It is impossible to imagine what they're going through at this time, and I'm sure all our hearts go out to them. I'm also thinking about the injured and their loved ones and all those who've been affected by this dreadful attack, which I should emphasise to people took part in a park when people were trying to enjoy a peaceful weekend. Most of all, I would like to also thank the emergency services and the police for their swift and immediate response, and indeed for the incredible bravery shown by some of the officers who, indeed, as it was said earlier, rugby tackled an armed offender and took that person to the ground. Mr Speaker, Reading is a friendly and peaceful town with a diverse and tolerant community, and this whole incident is completely unknown to us. It's something which has never occurred before in our community, and as such is deeply upsetting. That community solidarity was demonstrated again today when a wide range of different faith and community groups came together to lay flowers at the scene of this dreadful incident, and local people also observed a minute's silence. I'm very proud by the way that our community is pulling together at this difficult time and the way in which local people have been supporting one another. We can and we will come through this difficult time. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I pay tribute to the Honourable Gentleman for his comments and his remarks, and as we discussed this morning, I think it's absolutely right, and I think the way in which the community has come together, as we discussed earlier on, with the multi-faith groups, but also with the emergency services and the police officers that both of us have met as well, is absolutely outstanding. Like him, I pay tribute to those, the friends, family members of those who were hurt or killed, but as ever to the officers, the police officers and the emergency services that responded with such swiftness but with such bravery. And of course we will continue in our discussions in terms of the support that he needs for his constituents at this very difficult time.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My constituency borders Reading, and I speak on behalf of everyone in Newbury in sending my deepest sympathies to the families of the victims, and also I'd like to thank the Thames Valley Police for an exceptional response on Saturday night. No charging decision has been made, but it's true to say that in the last 3 years there have been 5 lone wolf attacks in Streatham, in Fishmongers Hall, on the Parsons Green Tube, on Westminster Bridge, and of course in the Manchester Arena. What reassurances can my right honourable friend give that the counter-terrorism services have sufficiently robust surveillance powers so that they can monitor this most unpredictable of threat?
And raises important questions and points, and of course surveillance is crucial. Surveillance and monitoring of individuals, subjects of interest, in terms of how they are managed and watched within our community. She specifically asked about resources, and that is something I speak to them every week, so we have these discussions. But resourcing is one thing, but it's the access to information and intelligence and how that blends together and how that is combined. So to be specific in answering her questions, they have the resources that they need. There is always more work to do. I'm sure there is more that can be done in the future. And I have already said, Mr. Speaker, in my statement, we need to listen and learn from what has happened. This will evolve over time as this investigation proceeds. And if we need to do more, then of course that's exactly what we'll be doing going forward.
Coming to the Chair of the Select Committee, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with the tributes from all sides of the House to those who have lost their lives in this awful attack, and also to the emergency services who responded so fast. Our thoughts will be with those who've lost loved ones, but also everyone in the community in Reading that will be dealing with the shock and trauma of this, as my honourable friend for Reading East has so powerfully expressed. The Home Secretary will know that this is about the most recent in a series of attacks by lone individuals that are harder for the police and security services to anticipate. But that also emphasises the importance of tackling some of the vile extremism and radicalisation that can lead to attacks, including online, in the community and in prison. Can she confirm that each of these will be included in the government's new counter-extremism strategy, and tell us when she expects to publish that?
I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her question, and in fact she raised a similar point last week as well, and I am actually writing to the Right Honourable Lady outlining the details of what we will be doing with the counter-extremism strategy. She is, however, right to point to online activities, the vile hatred that is spread both online but also on other forms of the web as well, the dark web in particular. There is a great deal of work, and I pay tribute to many of the organisations and individuals, some who we have not even referenced today, that work to close down sites, they work down to track these individuals, and some of the organisations that they're networked with as well. That work will always continue, but of course I will be sharing the details with the Right Honourable Lady shortly.
Chris Lauder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the face of great adversity, we often witness the very best of public spirit, selflessness and bravery from our fellow citizens. Those who sacrifice concern of their own safety in the interests of others, and no more so than the first responders during this terrorist attack in Reading, to whom I pay tribute. In the same way that my right honourable friend, the member for Bournemouth East, did so in March 2017, another member of our parliamentary family who, by chance, was at Forbury Gardens on Saturday, ran courageously towards danger, his only focus to help the injured. Mr. Speaker, I would like to pay particular tribute to James Antell, a member of my own staff, who not only used his own shirt to stem the bleeding of one victim, but continued resuscitation on a second victim until the paramedics arrived. This was indeed a remarkable and extraordinary effort from a young man who has been with us in Parliament for a little over 4 months, and whom I am extremely proud to have as part of the West Dorset parliamentary team, as I hope is the whole House.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Speaker, can I join with my honourable friend? A tribute to his assistant and to all other first responders who showed great humility, but also that sense of duty in coming together on Saturday in Forbury Gardens to respond and prevent the further loss of life. As I've already said, Mr. Speaker, they're the very best of all of us, and I pay tribute to everyone that was part of the emergency response, because quite frankly, the resilience that they've shown, the courage that they've shown, the bravery that they've all shown is to be commended.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and coming from the province as I do, we've been subject to many terrorist attacks over the years, and the Home Secretary and others in this House will be aware of that. So on behalf of the Democratic Unionist Party, can I offer my sincere condolences to the families of these victims. We understand your loss and we'll be praying for you in the days ahead. Can the Secretary of State outline what steps government will take to ensure that the families will see justice for their loved ones, but more than this, see lessons learned within the MI5 system to see improvements made? While no one can accurately predict the future, we must ask if we can do better with these persons of interest to prevent in future such travesties of violence.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his comments and for his understanding as well with regards to this particular case. He asked about support for the family. The Home Office is, along with Thames Valley Police as well, providing all the necessary support, particularly through family liaison officers, but also through the Victims of Terrorism unit at the Home Office. He is right to point to, he refers to one particular agency, but of course there are many other agencies that work across the intelligence and security spectrum. We work with all of them because they are part of that integrated network, along with policing, frontline policing and counter-terrorism policing. That work will continue, and I've already said, Mr. Speaker, to the House, if there are any issues, any lessons, any lines of inquiry that will need to be followed up, that we can proactively address and deal with, either in this House or through my actions as Home Secretary, that is something that I will absolutely be following up on.
Mr. Speaker, as a Berkshire MP, can I please place on record my personal sympathies to all those affected so gravely in neighbouring Reading. We've seen over the past 24 hours some media speculation about the immigration status of the alleged perpetrator. Could the Home Secretary please reassure me that it remains her priority to return people who come to the UK and who are proven to commit crime?
I thank my right honourable friend for his question. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I will not get into any speculation and commentary, but when it comes to the government's position on foreign national offenders, I could not be any clearer. Our policy is as stated: if you abuse our hospitality and commit crimes in the UK, we will do everything in our power to remove you, and that has been the focus of this government. And I'm also clear that tougher action is needed to speed up removals to deter foreign criminals from entering the UK. So it's not always easy. There are barriers to overcome, and that, of course, Mr. Speaker, is something that we will be looking at through other legislative means.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I, both for myself and for my party, add my voice to the expressions of sympathy for all those whose lives were touched by this dreadful incident, and in particular condolences to all those who mourn the loss of a loved one. Mr. Speaker, 3 months after I was first elected to this House in 2001, we saw the horrific events in New York and Washington on 9/11. That was followed by emergency anti-terror legislation. I struggle to think of a year since where we haven't had anti-terror legislation of some sort, but still the problem continues. I think we can be fairly certain that if the answer to this problem were to be found in a formulation of the law, we would have found it by now. So can I say to the Home Secretary, as she considers the formulation of a new counter-terror and counter-extremism strategy, we need to have the involvement of people who do not have any skin in the game, who in the nicest way possible have been part of the failure that has taken us to this part. And in particular, can that strategy be informed by an honest assessment of what it is going to do to end the radicalisation of those who find themselves within prisons?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend is absolutely right in terms of the need for objectivity and understanding in terms of how we formulate these strategies, which are often evolving, they are dynamic, they look at the behaviours of individuals, many of the behaviours that we ourselves simply do not understand. And de-radicalisation is a complicated issue. So he's absolutely right. There are many, and not just specific to what has happened in Reading over the weekend, but more broadly, it is right that we look at the whole approach holistically, understand failures of the past, what has worked in the past, but ensure that we have a comprehensive approach that really builds on constructive insights and learnings. And the Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right in his own assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yet another terrorist attack. I join with the Home Secretary in praising the first responders and those individuals that had no concern for their own lives to close this incident down. And I'm pleased to hear the initiatives that are being put forward in our probation service, in our communities, in our prisons. But we need to understand the wider picture that terrorism is increasing. At the time of the Bali bombing, there were 26 prescribed organisations by the Home Office.
that number has risen to 86, which you concede that isn't just a problem for the UK, but we need to look wider afield. The reasons why these things are happening is because there are fanatics working in ungoverned spaces, preying on vulnerable individuals, promoting a false interpretation of Islam. We pat ourselves on the back to say we defeated Daesh, but that's only territorially. That ideology lives on and continues to grow. The threat is there. And until we address this wider picture, the threat of terrorism in the UK will continue.
Fred is absolutely right about the threat, the real threat, the present danger of extremist ideologies. And of course, extremist ideologies can be, they manifest in many, many forms. And we all recognise that, and we see that internationally. As I've already said, Mr. Speaker, we see that online, we see that through individuals that are networked. And of course, we cannot tackle these issues on our own. And that is why our work internationally with the Five Eyes communities and many other international partners are so valid. We have to continue to grow the work that we do, learn from each other, grow our own intelligence networks, but importantly, understand the tactics and techniques that can make a difference in this space.
We're going to Scotland with Alan Brown. Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With 30,000 people of interest in security services at any one time, it's obvious they all cannot be under constant surveillance. But in a 7-month period, this is the 4th terrorist attack where the suspect, or potential suspect, was known to authorities. So what lessons can be learned in terms of surveillance and the management of these people known to authorities?
So my honourable friend asks, the honourable gentleman asks, important questions about surveillance techniques, and of course there are always lessons learned about surveillance techniques and how people are monitored. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned in my statement, the intelligence and security services have to make calculated judgments based on the risk of threat, the intelligence, the information that they have, and that is something that they will continue to do. And of course they are constantly reviewing many of their own techniques.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I extend my deepest sympathies to the family and friends of those who lost someone, and also commend the Thames Valley Police and Emergency Services. My constituency is in the Thames Valley and I know how good they are. Does my right honourable friend think that when the police do have the person they think has committed this crime, that the media attention should focus on the victims and not on the beliefs and backstory of the people who perpetrate attacks like this, thereby denying them the attention that they crave?
Well, there is merit in that point that the honourable gentleman makes, of course. It should not be about the spotlight being on the individual, the organisation, those that are purporting terror, hate and fear. We must always be respectful and mindful to the victims, and of course at times like this we have to give the police in particular the time and space that they need to get on with their investigations.
13 is now withdrawn, so we go to Steve Baker. Steve Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask my right honourable friend to give us an update on the progress of the Prevent review, and in particular, will she take steps to make it more effective, and in particular more effective by making sure it's a bit more attractive to the people it's supposed to reach?
Friend is absolutely right. There is work taking place with regards to the Prevent review itself, and there'll be more details forthcoming on that shortly. The fact of the matter is we do need to work harder at a community level to avoid any stigmatisation, but actually to encourage people to engage and participate, but also understand the type of techniques and tactics that will make a difference. And that's something I'll be very happy to discuss further with the honourable gentleman.
Ria Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The person who's been arrested, suspected of these offences, has been reported as being of interest to the security services as a potential terrorist sympathiser and was released well before the end of his sentence from a prison, a mere 16 days before this murderous rampage took place. There have been newspaper reports of him engaging in alarming behaviour ahead of the incident. So given these serious concerns, can the Home Secretary confirm for me that he was being supervised when he left prison under multi-agency arrangements for public protection, as would seem appropriate, and if so, at what level?
Mr. Speaker, as I've already said, there is an investigation underway in relation to this incident, and it'd be thoroughly inappropriate for me to comment any further.
Secretary Butter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of the people of Meriden, I'd like to join the whole House in conveying my condolences to the loved ones of the victims of this heinous attack. And I'd also like to commend the police force and the emergency services who once again who acted heroically and put the safety of others before their own. Does my right honourable friend agree that we can never weaken in our resolve to win this battle against terrorism, and those that seek to divide us will never be allowed to succeed?
My friend is absolutely right, and of course our objective is to ensure that they are never successful and that our values of tolerance and respect prevail. And at a time like this, of course, we support our police, we respect and support our emergency workers, we think about the families of the victims and those that have been hurt. But ultimately, our collective role has to be to unite as a country and stand against the type of hate and terrorism that is being purported.
Mr. Speaker, and of course we join all the tributes that have been paid to everyone affected by this terrible attack. It is the third terrorist attack since the UK terror threat level was reduced in November. Is she considering the use of the scale of the terror threat level and whether there is any consideration of reviewing the criteria and the circumstances around the raising or lowering of the threat level?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman will know that, of course, that terror threat is independent of the Home Secretary and the Home Office. It's a JTAC assessment. The fact of the matter is the threat level is substantial, and on that basis we all continue to be vigilant and obviously monitor situations and engage with our intelligence and security services and take the relevant advice.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Derbyshire Dales, I'd like to offer my deep condolences to the family and friends of those who lost their life at the weekend. The terrorist attack that took place over the weekend was a callous and senseless act of terrorism, fuelled apparently by hatred and disdain of our society. Will my right honourable friend agree to commit to looking further at not only the management of these type of individuals, but the laws that underpin their sentences, but also their possible early release and also possible removal from these shores?
Well, my honourable friend has raised a number of issues in terms of the laws that we have, laws that are being discussed in this House of Commons this week in particular with regards to the Counter-terrorism and Sentencing Bill. She is right, of course we review our laws, update our laws, but at times like this, first and foremost, we have to come together to look at any lessons, any issues, any challenges. It is too early to do that. There is a live investigation on, and it is important, of course, as ever, that we continue to review our legislation, but also the type of tactics and resources that are required at times like this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we must always look at what more we can do to prevent such an absolutely horrendous crime. But will she agree with her predecessor as Home Secretary, Lord Howard, that what we need is a measured response and not a knee-jerk reaction? And will she make sure to engage with the Scottish Government and other devolved governments before bringing back any measures that she thinks may be necessary?
The honourable gentleman makes an important point. This is not about knee-jerk reactions at all. Importantly, there is a live police investigation on. It is wrong for anybody to comment or speculate around the individual, but also in terms of what next steps need to be taken. And as ever in this House, when it comes to legislation, reforms or changes, they are all discussed in the right way, not just on the floor of this House, but obviously across parties.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Ashfield stand together and united in grief over this cowardly attack on innocent individuals. We are a peaceful and tolerant nation with a proud record of welcoming refugees and asylum seekers, the vast majority of whom have come to the UK and contributed positively to society, like the men I used to work with down the pits in the 80s. These were displaced people at the end of World War II. They had no country, no home to go to, and we gave them a home, and in return they grafted down the pits to raise good, decent families and made our country a better place. However, there is something wrong if an individual has come into this country illegally and been granted asylum and then goes on to be a security risk. Could my right honourable friend please tell me what steps her department will be taking to ensure we do not have another instance of a potential terrorist slipping through the net of the security services?
Well, my right honourable friend makes some important points about the contribution of those refugees in particular who are who come to our country because they're being persecuted elsewhere, and we rightly give them a home and they establish their lives in our country. We are a free, open, tolerant country, and as Mr. Speaker, I've said before on the floor of the House, I think we're one of the greatest countries in the world, and when it comes to giving people the freedom to succeed and get on and live their lives, we offer that opportunity. I'm not going to comment on anything to do with the individual. There is a live investigation, but I do want to reiterate, of course, that when it comes to offenders, foreign national offenders in particular, this government is absolutely clear in terms of the approach that we are taking to speed up the removal of individuals. Within the law, there are complexities naturally in some cases, in fact many cases, but that's why we are seeking through measures that were outlined, Mr. Speaker, in the Queen's speech earlier on this year, and we will continue with our policies and legislation going forward.
Scotland with Owen Thompson. Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Words can't express the horror of an attack such as this, and I'd certainly add my condolences to the families and friends of all the victims. It has been reported that the intelligence services believe mental health was an issue in this incident. Now, can the Home Secretary comment further on what further support could be offered to individuals who may be known to mental health services, especially where there's an interest from intelligence services?
Speaker, again, I will not comment on the investigation and the individuals and reports in the newspapers. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, the Solicitor General has also issued warnings to the media this afternoon on that, so that there is nobody prejudicing the case, which is absolutely vital. But of course, the Honourable Gentleman makes an important point about individuals that are known. Of course, those individuals, many of whom, if they are, as has already been raised on the floor of the House this afternoon, if they are in prison, if they're known to probation services, there is work that takes place through probation services, through MAPA, through various risk assessments around the individuals. Of course, that will continue. And of course, the MOJ are constantly reviewing not just their own policies, but practices. And that is very much standard along with all the individuals who need bespoke support, not just now, but throughout their own development, whether they're inside or prison or when they're released from prison.
That's right, Garner.
My thoughts, and along with my Wilden constituents, are with the victims and their families, and we pay tribute to the brave police who ran towards danger. Mr. Speaker, whilst on the Home Affairs Select Committee we tackled radicalisation and the tipping point, does my right honourable friend agree with me that there are two rules that apply, regardless if you are a far-right extremist or an Islamist extremist? The conscious role of social media companies that spread propaganda and groom, and also the importance of community projects such as Prevent.
My friend is absolutely right in terms of the role of network providers, but effectively programmes like Prevent as well. There is much more that we can do, and of course there is work that's underway constantly.
Into Scotland again with Neil Gray. Neil Gray.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My heart breaks, as I know it does for my constituents across Airdrie and Shotts, for those who've lost their lives and their families and loved ones, and I echo the sentiments that have already been expressed. And following on from that previous question, it would be wrong to speculate on motive, but can the Home Secretary update the House in more detail what she's doing to break up online grooming campaigns to prevent young people, young individuals from being radicalised?
Mr. Speaker, there is a great deal of work that's taking place on this particular issue that the Honourable Gentleman has raised. I'm very happy, in the interest of time, to write to him and outline more of that.
Speaker, whilst the police and security services continue in their vital work to track down and prevent lone actors tempted to carry out an attack, does my right honourable friend agree that there is no community in the UK that even tacitly condones an outrage such as this, that the perpetrators are typically loners, misfits, mentally unstable and socially inadequate, in no way representative of any community view?
Makes important points. He's right that these individuals do not represent any community or a community view.
Wendy Chandler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In January of this year, the Government said it would follow through in conducting a review of its Prevent strategy. However, 6 months on, there is still no chair for the review committee, and although I understand that the deadline for applications was extended due to COVID, the applications closed today, the progress of this review must be priority. Can the Secretary of State update the House on when they expect to appoint a reviewer and when they plan to conclude the review, given the expectation was that the committee would report in August?
I will do so in due course, Mr Speaker. The Honourable Lady is absolutely right. The deadline has been extended. I think it is actually today is the closing date. So in due course that information will be shared.
Heading to Harlow with Robert Holfen. Robert Holfen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given that most of these awful tragedies tend to be in cities, and this one was in a town, has my right honourable friend made an assessment of terrorist activities in towns across the United Kingdom, and will she do everything possible to support Essex Police in the work they do to keep Harlow Town safe from crime and from terrorism?
Right honourable friend is absolutely right. Assessments of this nature take place constantly through our security and intelligence services and also with our police forces. And my right honourable friend will naturally know that I will also do everything that I can to ensure that our brilliant police officers in Essex and our great Chief Constable BJ Harrington is also supported both for Harlow Town in resources but obviously across the whole county of Essex.
Turn to Scotland again with Margaret Furry. Margaret Furry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I join honourable members across the House in sending my condolences to the families of those who were killed in this horrendous attack. The Home Secretary has recognised that terrorists are increasingly acting alone, and we need to do everything we can to protect communities from this growing threat. What assurances can she give that the Home Office is adapting its counter-terrorism response to the use of low-tech weapons by terrorists acting in isolation?
Point out to the low sophistication of many of these lone actors. There is constant work, and it's not just in the Home Office. It is based on intelligence, working with our partners, working with agencies, and of course that informs our collective approach, the strategies that we develop with our partner organisations.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I welcome the measures my right honourable friend has introduced since she took office. But time and again my constituents contact me and say we read of these individuals who pose a threat to our values, our democracy and the safety of our citizens, and yet we still allow them into the country and we do not remove them. Can I add the support of myself and my constituents to the appeals earlier to remove more of these people, and will she redouble her efforts to achieve that?
So, Mr Speaker, to my honourable friend's question is absolutely yes. I've already pointed to some of the legislation that will be forthcoming, and that work will obviously be accelerated.
Heading to Martin Day in Linlithgow. Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for her statement today and would wish to extend my condolences and sympathy to everyone affected by this appalling attack. The PREVENT strategy is a key element of the counter-terrorism strategy. However, the intended review has been impacted by the reviewer stepping down over concerns of impartiality. Can the Secretary of State inform what lessons regarding this appointment have been learned, and when will the next reviewer be in place?
Speaker, as I've already said to the House this afternoon, recruitment process is underway. The deadline closes today. More information will be forthcoming once that reviewer has been appointed. And of course, it's important that there's an objective process around that. That is something that I completely support.
Michael Lumley.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The right to life is the greatest right of all, and I know my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is doing everything she can to protect British citizens under current legal frameworks. Could my right honourable friend confirm how Brexit will enable our government to better protect our citizens from future potential terrorists whom we may not be allowed to deport or detain under current transnational legal obligations?
And points to some important changes that will be forthcoming, including further and greater criminality checks at our borders through our future borders and immigration work, through our points-based system, and many of the changes that we'll be bringing forward. And if I may, Mr Speaker, this also touches upon the Foreign National Offenders Bill, as mentioned and highlighted in the humble address earlier on this year. These are important pieces of legislation that will signal to major changes when it comes to Britain's post-Brexit and how we will keep our country safe, our citizens safe, but also have greater control of our borders.
David Linden.
Thank you very much. Today clearly is a day for us to be thinking of the families affected and to thank those officers who ran
there on Saturday night. But the Home Secretary said repeatedly that lessons will have to be learned from this, and an element of that means scrutiny. So can the Home Secretary tell us when the Intelligence and Security Select Committee will be reconvening? Because I understand it's not reconvened since the election last year. So can the Home Secretary put that on record, please?
So, Mr. Speaker, is that I understand that the appointments of the committee are underway, and when that selection has been completed, all members of the House will be notified through the usual channels.
Priti Patel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend has announced an additional £90 million for counter-terrorism policing. Can she reassure me that that money will be ring-fenced?
Secretary.
I can absolutely say, Mr. Speaker, that money is that was the increase for this year alone, which has taken funding for counter-terrorism policing to £900 million. We have other reforms underway, other initiatives underway when it comes to counter-terrorism policing. But I think, if I may, Mr. Speaker, it's important to reflect that, of course, counter-terrorism policing do not work on their own. They're part of the wider UK policing family and network. They are plugged into our intelligence services and our community. And that integrated approach is absolutely vital when it comes to keeping our people, the citizens of our country, our communities and our country safe.
Going to Motherwell with Margaret Fellows. Mariam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a day when we come together to absolutely show our abhorrence at these terrible, terrible deeds. And can I give my sympathies to all concerned who have been so badly affected. Mr. Speaker, in 2015, the then Justice Secretary Michael Gove asked Ian Aitchison, a former prison governor, to review how extremism was being handled. Mr. Aitchison concluded that the system was full of flaws. What steps has the Home Secretary taken to address the concerns outlined in this report?
The Aitchison review, the report itself, made various recommendations, and that is something that I, along with the Lord Chancellor and across government, we are constantly reviewing and working on. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, I've already mentioned the PREVENT strategy, the work that's taking place on counter-extremism. We must look at all of this collectively and together, rather than creating strategies in isolation.
Heading to South Derbyshire with Heather Wheeler. Heather Wheeler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Further to my honourable friend from Kensington's question about the £90 million, on behalf of the residents of South Derbyshire, can I ask my right honourable friend that it is a matter of a key priority that her department will be cracking down on terrorist atrocities going forward?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and of course we do this collectively, not in isolation, working with our police, counter-terrorism policing family across the country, but also with our security and intelligence networks. We base everything on their work, the threats, the judgments that they make, and these resources, the £900 million for counter-terrorism policing, are absolutely vital on top of the funding and resource for our intelligence and security networks, and of course that is what effectively keeps our nation safe, as we've seen through the number of threats that they've foiled.
Patricia Gibson.
Mr. Speaker, and I wish to echo very much the condolences that have been expressed across this House today. The UK only recently began operating so-called separation units for the highest risk detainees in prison, but we know that concerns have been expressed across the prison service about whether or not these separation units are being properly used. Can the Home Secretary update the House today on how many of these separation units are indeed in use across the prison estate in the UK, and if they are being used effectively?
In response to the Honourable Lady's question, on the specifics, I will consult the Ministry of Justice, who will know the details of this, and we will happily ask them to write to the Honourable Lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Out of the blue, and with no intelligence prior information, 3 terrorists once came to my house to kill me. They were stopped by my 11-year-old son Alexander in the front garden when they asked him, was his daddy home? I was home, but he felt something was wrong. By good luck and chance, they then got into their car and disappeared and killed someone else. But luck for me, not for them. My point, my right honourable friend, is this. It is almost impossible for the police and the security services to identify
people like this who decide on their own, with a knife, to go out and do great harm. That's true. But can I ask my right honourable friend to commend bystanders and policemen who, with huge courage, tackle these people and bring them down and stop far more other innocents being killed.
Yeah. Well, my friend is absolutely right, and Mr. Speaker, we saw this at the weekend with the police officer, unarmed police officer, who apprehended the suspect, the individual, and we've seen this in many other cases. And at times like this, we know that individuals like this are the very best of us, and they would have done a great deal to keep other people protected and out of danger.
37 withdrawn, so we go to Gareth Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, yet again we have a terrorist attack that was aimed at the wholly innocent. This was an act of pure hatred. So does the Home Secretary agree with me that this highlights the difficulties that the security forces have to contend with when trying to monitor 30 to 40,000 people who at any stage could decide to attack people? The challenges they face are absolutely huge, and so therefore we should be swift to support them rather than swift to judge them.
Is absolutely right, and the work that they do, the work that they undertake is vast, it's complicated, and obviously is also based upon intelligence at home and sometimes abroad as well. So we must all reflect upon the way in which they work. Of course, they make difficult decisions and judgments based upon information that they have. I commend them in every single way for the work that they do, and that I pay tribute to them for the way in which they work.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My thoughts and condolences are with the victims, their friends and family. I take the point about a media report, so be careful what I say, but I will ask one quite direct question. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that our legal system has become a roadblock preventing the elected governments of the day from being able to take decisions on the basis of what's in the best interests of a law-abiding majority, both by inhibiting our ability to deal with illegal immigration and to deport those we know to pose a risk to our country?
Mr. Speaker, I've spoken previously on the floor of the House about the complexities when it comes to immigration, the immigration system, immigration law, but also I've already touched on the difficulty with deporting foreign national offenders. There are many challenges in the system. We intend to overcome them, and we will intend to reform the system in any way that we can.
Sarah Brittley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd firstly like to send my condolences to the family and friends of those who have lost their loved ones in this terrible attack. It's a duty of this government to do everything in their power to prevent families from ever having to go through what these families will be going through now. So does the Secretary of State agree that action must now be taken to strengthen public confidence in the criminal justice system, and that terrorist offenders should spend more time in prisons to match the severity of their crimes?
The Honourable Lady speaks for the silent majority across our country on this particular point, and she's right, and we are right in our assessment that those who offend, the highest harm offenders, should be in prison and in prison for longer. That is the purpose of the Counter-terrorism and Sentencing Bill. We are very clear in that, and of course that is under debate this week as it goes into committee in this House.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes.
Order. Order. I call the member for Yeovil, Mr Marcus Fish, to make a personal statement.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Following a report issued last Thursday by the Committee on Standards, I would like to take this opportunity to apologise to the House for not registering and not declaring unremunerated directorships of companies in my wholly owned investment group, Samphire Proprietary Limited, namely of that company, of Alibante Developments Limited, of Mackinaw Holdings Limited, and of West Sea Investments Limited, and also for my late updating of the register for company name changes in 2018. The financial interests in ownership were registered and declared. There isn't a conflict of interest, and my judgment was that, as in my view, the unremunerated directorships do not have any bearing on my work as a member of this House, and could not, in my view, reasonably be thought to, it was not required that I should declare them. The relevant rule says that non-financial interests should be registered and declared if the member considers that they might reasonably be thought by others to influence them in their activities as a member. The Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards took a different view. The committee supported her, and I accept their findings. I apologise to the House for this situation, born of a misunderstanding of what is required, and will update my register of interests accordingly. The committee's report also asked me to apologise to the Commissioner and the Registrar of Members' Financial Interests, and I will write and agree the text of that apology in advance with the Chair of the Committee. I would like also to put on record my thanks to the Commissioner and Registrar and to the Committee for their time in this matter.
Thank you. Presentation of Bill Layla Moran.
European Union Withdrawal Agreement Extension Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 10th of July.
Friday the 10th of July. Thank you. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Extradition Provisional Arrest Bill, Lords, second reading.
No. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. I call Minister Kevin Foster to move the second reading.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I beg to move the bill now be read a second time. I will start by making it very clear what this bill does not do. It does not change our extradition process, nor any of the safeguards which already exist in extradition proceedings. This bill does not make it more or less likely a person will be extradited. It does not in any way affect the current judicial oversight of the extradition process or the character of the court proceedings themselves.